At Sarah's engagement at dinner, Carol leaned across the linen, her voice a little too loud. I helped Mark pick out that ring, darling, told him exactly what a woman wants. The laughter died. Sarah's face crumpled. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, exposed by her words. Carol just smiled, a private, knowing look. The damp carpet fibers clung to Dave Miller's jeans. His head swam, a thick current pulling the edges of the room into a blur. The beige walls, the dark wood of the dresser, the muted pattern of the bedspread, all softened, losing their sharp definition. On the bedside table, a half-empty glass of amber liquid sat next to an empty whiskey bottle, its label now a crumpled memory. Beside it, a small orange pill container, also hollowed out, lay abandoned near a stack of unopened letters, their edges crisp and accusing. A raw pain throbbed in both of Dave's wrists, a dull, insistent ache. The alcohol and the pills had done their work, dulling the sharper edges of his despair, replacing them with a heavy, generalized soreness. He leaned his head back against the edge of the mattress, the faint smell of dust and old fabric filling his nostrils. The room was cold, or perhaps he was cold. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. Just last week, the world had still held its shape. His life had felt complete, circling as it always had around his daughter, Sarah, in the comfortable rhythm of their suburban home in Willow Creek. Sarah, 19 and vibrant, had just agreed to marry Mark Johnson. Mark was a good kid, steady and kind, the kind of boy you hoped your daughter would find. They had been together since middle school, their love story unfolding with a predictable, comforting logic. Mark had come to Dave's workshop, a little nervous, hands shoved deep in his pockets, the way young men do when they're about to ask for something important. He'd laid out his plans, his hopes for Sarah, his future. Dave had listened, a warmth spreading through him. He'd clapped Mark on the shoulder, giving his blessing without a second thought. It felt right. It felt good. The celebration had been at the Gilded Spoon, a fancy enough place for an engagement dinner, but still within the bounds of what felt right for their Midwestern sensibilities. The table was laden with good food, the wine flowed, and the conversation was light, punctuated by Sarah's bright laughter. Carol, his wife of 25 years, sat across from him, looking elegant in a deep blue dress he'd always liked. Everything felt perfect. Then Carol had cleared her throat, drawing the conversation to a momentary halt. She smiled, a little too wide, as Mark recounted the story of how he'd bought the ring. Well, you know, she interjected, her voice carrying a touch too much volume for the intimate setting. I actually helped pick that out, didn't I, sweetie? Told him exactly what a young woman like Sarah would want. The room seemed to pause. The clink of a fork on a plate, the murmur from the next table, even the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen, all faded. Sarah's bright smile had vanished, replaced by a look of mortification. Mom, she said, her voice strained, that was inappropriate. Mark's face, already flushed from the wine and the excitement, deepened to a startling crimson. He looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Dave felt a strange, cold awkwardness spread through him, prickling at the back of his neck. Carol just took a sip of her wine, her eyes meeting his for a split second, a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't the first time she'd been a bit off over the past few months. Little comments, odd silences, a slight distance he couldn't place. He had tried to ignore them, to rationalize them away. Later that night, the house quiet, Dave lay awake in their king-sized bed, the ceiling a dark expanse above him. Carol's words replayed in his mind, clear and sharp in the silence. I told him exactly what a young woman like Sarah would want. The tremor, he realized, wasn't just a fleeting discomfort. It was a first, deep vibration, shaking the solid earth of his marriage. He tried to shake the feeling, to push it away. It was just the stress, he told himself. Sarah growing up, leaving the nest. Big changes. People said silly things when they were nervous or excited, but the explanation felt thin, translucent. The silence in the bedroom felt heavier than usual, pressing down, filling the space between them. He turned his head on the pillow, glancing at Carol, asleep beside him. Her breathing was even, shallow. In the faint spill of moonlight from the window, a shadow seemed to fall across her face, a line of unfamiliarity. He looked at her, searching for the woman he knew, and found only a quiet uncertainty. Sunday morning light filtered through the blinds, striping the bedroom floor in pale gold. Dave stirred, the lingering unease from the previous night still clinging to him like damp sheets. He turned, reaching instinctively for Carol, seeking the familiar warmth, the comforting weight of another body beside him. Their rituals were ingrained after 21 years. A soft murmur, a hand finding a waist, the slow, comfortable melding of sleep-warm skin. He pressed his body against hers, his hand resting gently on her hip, and leaned in to kiss the curve of her neck. Mid-embrace, before his lips even touched her skin, Carol stiffened. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift. But Dave felt it. She pulled away, a decisive, abrupt movement that left his arms suspended in the air. She didn't speak. She simply sat up, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and walked across the room to the bathroom. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Dave there, alone, his hands still reaching, his body unfulfilled, his mind stunned. The shower started, the hiss of water filling the sudden silence. Then, over the sound of the spray, her voice carried, cold and thin, tinged with a distinct annoyance. "What's the matter?" she called out. "Is there anything for me?" The words hit Dave like a slap. A shock rippled through him, colder than the morning air. Not just the bluntness, but the sheer disrespect. 21 years. They had built a life, a family, a home. He had never felt such a profound lack of regard from her, not even during their worst arguments. It was dismissive, almost contemptuous. He stared at the closed bathroom door, the steam now seeping under the crack, blurring the edges of the familiar wood. He got out of bed, the mattress still warm on his side, unnervingly cold on hers. After his own shower, the lukewarm spray doing little to warm him, he found a note on the kitchen counter. Carol's neat script, usually so comforting, now seemed alien. Hurried. Went out, errands, see you later. No time, no location, no hint of a return, just a terse, almost defiant dismissal. He brewed coffee, the aroma of the dark roast doing little to clear the fog in his mind. He watched the dark liquid drip into the carafe, a slow, methodical rhythm that failed to soothe him. The question, which had been a whisper the night before, now burned, sharp and clear. Is she cheating on me? The thought tasted bitter, like ash in his mouth. The phone rang, jarring him from his stupor. It was Bill Peterson, his old college friend, a man whose easygoing manner often masked a keen, pragmatic mind. "Dave, you sound like you've been through the ringer," Bill said without preamble, his voice kind but direct. "Everything all right over there?" Dave hesitated. He hadn't intended to tell anyone. But Bill had a way of cutting through the pretense. He found himself speaking, the words tumbling out, raw and unedited. He told Bill about the engagement dinner, Carol's comment, the strange behavior, the coldness that morning, the terse note. The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but heavy. Bill listened, quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, devoid of judgment, but filled with a grim realism Dave knew well. "Buddy, look, I don't know what's going on, but if she's cheating on you, there's not much you can do. You know how it works. Divorce is 50-50 at best, and she's out of work. She hasn't worked since Sarah was born, right?" "Right," Dave said, his voice flat. Carol had dedicated herself to raising Sarah, a choice they had both agreed upon. His income from the construction supply company had always been enough. "So she's got no income of her own," Bill continued, his tone matter of fact. "Which means in court, she'd take you to the cleaners. Alimony, child support for Sarah, even though she's 19 and engaged, half of everything. Your pension, your savings, probably even the house. It'd be messy, Dave. Real messy." Dave hung up the phone, the receiver feeling heavy in his hand. Bill's words chilled him to the bone, a deep, pervasive cold. It wasn't just the money, though the thought of losing everything he'd worked for was a stark blow. It was the stark reality of it all, laid bare. The cold, mechanical process of dismantling a life, of separating all the intertwined threads. The humiliation, the exhaustion. Carol returned late that night. Dave heard the faint click of the garage door, the soft rustle of her movements as she slipped into the house. He was already in bed, lying rigid, pretending to be asleep. He heard the whisper of her clothes as she changed, the soft creak of the mattress as she eased herself beside him. She said nothing. She didn't even sigh. Just the quiet settling of her body next to his, a deliberate act of pretending he wasn't there, or that nothing had changed. The gap between them felt like a canyon now, windy and dark, unbridgeable. Each minute that passed, each unsaid word, each feigned sleep, made it wider. Dave stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in. An unfamiliar cold dread seeped into his bones, a quiet terror of what was coming next, what this quiet, insidious shift in his life truly meant. Monday morning dawned gray and cold, mirroring the landscape of Dave's mind. Carol was in the kitchen, humming a tune he didn't recognize, a forced lightness in her movements. She offered him coffee, a brittle smile on her lips, her eyes not quite meeting his. The pretense of normalcy after the silent chasm of the weekend grated on him. It felt like she was mocking him, or perhaps testing him. He stood by the dresser, fumbling with the buttons of his work shirt, his hands clumsier than usual. The fabric felt rough against his skin. He didn't look at her, but he felt her presence, a subtle shift in the air. She moved closer, a faint scent of her morning perfume, something new reaching him. It was a familiar pattern, a silent invitation, a routine they had enacted countless times over 2 decades. Not today. "It's not going to happen, Carol," Dave stated flatly, his voice devoid of warmth, as he struggled to knot his tie. He pulled it tight, almost painfully so, around his neck. Carol paused, the clinking of her mug against the counter suddenly ceasing. He could feel her gaze on his back. "What are you talking about?" Her voice was thin, edged with a carefully manufactured innocence. He turned slowly, meeting her eyes. They widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, or perhaps feigned disbelief. "You're saying no?" she asked, her tone ringing hollow, a performance for an audience of one. "I won't touch you," Dave said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "Not after your disrespect for me last weekend, the comments at dinner, the way you spoke to me this morning. You think I'm just going to forget that?" He gestured vaguely towards the empty coffee mug she held, then back towards the bedroom. He wanted to articulate the deeper, gnawing suspicion, the question that had kept him awake. He started, the words catching in his throat. "I swear if you cheat on me." Carol cut him off with a sound that sent a shiver down his spine. A small, chilling chuckle, low in her throat. She took a step closer, her eyes cold and hard, a stranger's gaze. She used his full name, a formality she rarely employed outside of arguments. "You're going to do what, Dave?" she challenged, her voice dropping to a whisper, filled with an unsettling confidence. "There's not a damn thing you can do." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. A wave of profound disgust washed over Dave, cold and immediate. Disgust for her, for the casual cruelty, for the way she had dismantled their intimacy with such callous ease. He had never associated such a raw, visceral feeling with his wife, the woman he had married, the mother of his child. It was a betrayal deeper than any physical act, a stripping away of respect that left him exposed and raw. He turned without another word, grabbing his briefcase from the hall table. He left the house, the door clicking shut softly behind him, a sound that felt more final than any slam. The bitter taste of her words lingered in his mouth, a metallic tang that wouldn't go away. The drive to the construction supply company office was a blur of familiar streets and unfamiliar thoughts. At work, the fluorescent lights hummed with their usual monotony. Lisa Jenkins, his assistant, was already at her desk, her neat blonde hair pulled back. She looked up as he entered, her efficient smile faltering slightly when she saw his face. "Dave, are you all right?" Lisa asked, concern immediately etching lines on her forehead. "You look out of sorts, like you haven't slept." He forced a weak smile, running a hand over his face. "Just a rough start to the week, Lisa. Nothing I can't handle." But even as he said the words, he knew they were a lie. His focus was shattered, fragmented into 1,000 sharp pieces. He went into his office, closing the door quietly. The stacks of paperwork, the computer screen, the neatly organized calendar, all seemed to mock his disarray. The Pemro project report, a meticulous task requiring absolute concentration, sat on his desk, an impossible mountain to climb. Usually he'd dive into the numbers, the logistics, the problem solving, finding a quiet satisfaction in the work. Today the figures blurred, the details refused to coalesce. He pushed it away, leaning back in his chair, then stood. He paced his office, 3 steps to the window, 3 steps back to the door, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights amplifying the roaring turmoil within his head. The grim reality of his broken marriage, the sharp edges of Carol's cruelty, began to settle over him. It wasn't a sudden storm, but a slow, persistent chill, heavy and unforgiving, like the onset of a long Midwestern winter. The days that followed blurred into a strained, unbearable routine. Carol's late nights became more frequent, her excuses thinner, delivered with an indifferent shrug. A girls' night out here, a shopping trip there. But the details were always vague, the timing inconsistent. Dave watched her, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach with each passing evening. The air in the house grew heavy, thick with unspoken words and festering suspicion. He started checking the phone bills, discreetly, after Carol had tossed them on the kitchen counter. His eyes scanned the itemized list, looking for patterns, for anomalies. It didn't take long. A number appeared repeatedly, a long-distance prefix he didn't recognize. At odd hours, late at night. Early in the morning, calls lasting minutes, sometimes half an hour. The name associated with the number was generic, a cell phone company offering no clues. But the pattern was undeniable. A cold certainty began to settle in his gut. Then came the small things, details that pricked at him. A new perfume, expensive and unfamiliar, not the light floral scent she usually wore. He'd catch a faint whiff of it on her scarves, on her pillow. There were new clothes too, blouses and skirts he hadn't seen her buy, clothes that seemed a little too fashionable for her usual casual wardrobe. He kept quiet, observing, cataloging. Each new detail was a tiny brick added to a growing wall of dread. One Tuesday evening, after she'd announced another late meeting with friends, Dave waited. He watched from the darkened living room as her car pulled out of the driveway. He gave her a 10-minute head start, then started his own pickup truck, the engine grumbling softly in the cool night air. He followed her, maintaining a safe distance, his headlights off until she reached the main road. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, his breath hitched in his chest. She pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Door, a bar on the edge of town, a place he knew she rarely frequented. He parked his truck down the street, obscured by a line of dormant oak trees, and watched. Minutes later, the bar door opened, spilling a momentary rectangle of yellow light onto the sidewalk. Carol emerged laughing, and beside her, a man. He was younger, Dave noted immediately, with dark, slicked-back hair and a smile that seemed a little too wide, a little too confident. Not a friend, never just a friend. The man's hand rested on Carol's lower back, a familiar gesture that spoke volumes. Then, as they stood by her car under the dim glow of the street lamp, the man leaned in, his arm wrapping around her, and he kissed her. It was a quick kiss, a casual embrace, but it was intimate. Too intimate. Dave felt a physical blow, a sudden gut-wrenching impact that left him breathless. A cold, empty ache bloomed in his chest, spreading quickly, consuming the space where his heart used to be. The world outside the truck's window seemed to tilt, the streetlights blurring into streaks of light and shadow. The crisp night air felt like ice in his lungs. He sat there, numb, watching them part, watching Carol get into her car, her laughter still echoing in his ears. He drove home in a daze, the familiar Midwestern landscape, the dark fields, the quiet farmhouses, the towering silhouettes of corn silos, blurring past his window, mirroring the chaotic churn inside his head. Each mile marker was a punch, each turn of the wheel, a hollow thud. That night, Carol came home later than usual. She walked into the kitchen humming and offered a perfunctory rough day. Dave sat at the kitchen table, a glass of water untouched before him. He kept his voice even, devoid of accusation. "Where were you?" he asked, his gaze fixed on her face, searching for a tell, a flicker of guilt. She paused, taking off her coat. "Oh, you know, just with the girls. Brenda, Janet. We went to that new Italian place downtown, then grabbed a drink at the Blue Door." Her voice was calm, almost bored. No hesitation, no tremor, no tell. The ease with which she lied, the casual delivery of deception, twisted the knife deeper than the affair itself. The physical act of betrayal had shattered his trust, but the lies, spoken so effortlessly, carved out a piece of his soul. The next morning, Dave called Bill. He recounted everything, the phone calls, the perfume, the follow, the kiss. Bill listened, his silence punctuated by an occasional thoughtful grunt. "All right, Dave," Bill said, his voice grave. "This changes things. You need to protect yourself. Don't confront her yet. Not until you've got more. Photos, anything. Get some solid proof. Don't give her an advantage." Dave moved through his days feeling like a stranger in his own home. He watched Carol, this person he no longer recognized, her casual demeanor, her easy smiles, all a cruel performance for him. The weight of the secret, the profound betrayal, pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. It was a constant, suffocating pressure. Sleep offered no escape. His nights were haunted by the vivid, unwelcome images of Carol's laughter, the man's hand on her back, the casual intimacy of their embrace under the street lamp. The weeks that followed were a cold, methodical exercise in painful evidence gathering. Dave became a quiet, observant shadow in his own home. He copied phone records, noting the frequent calls to the unknown number. He meticulously tracked credit card statements, highlighting suspicious charges for hotels outside of town, for restaurants he knew Carol never visited with her friends. He bought a small, discreet camera, setting it up in his truck. He took photos, grainy and distant, but undeniable. Carol and the younger man, laughing, touching, entering and exiting places together. Each piece of evidence was a fresh shard of glass, embedding itself deeper into his soul. He compiled it all into a neat, incriminating stack, a testament to a life unraveling. He chose a quiet Tuesday evening. Sarah was out with Mark, leaving the house empty save for the two of them. Carol sat on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a faint smile playing on her lips. Dave walked into the living room, a manila folder held loosely in his hand. He didn't speak. He simply placed the folder on the coffee table between them and slid it towards her. Carol looked up, a flicker of annoyance at the interruption. Her eyes landed on the folder, then back to him, a question in their depths. She opened it, slowly at first, then with a growing urgency. Her casual posture stiffened. She scrolled through the phone records, her finger tracing the highlighted calls. She looked at the credit card statements, her gaze fixed on the hotel receipts. Then she saw the photos. The initial shock, a widening of her eyes, quickly hardened into defiance. Her face, usually so composed, contorted into a bitter mask. She looked from the evidence to Dave, her gaze cutting, unapologetic. "So," she said, her voice flat, "you've been playing detective." "Carol," Dave began, his voice barely a whisper, thick with the weight of unshed tears. "How could you?" She tossed the folder back onto the table, a dismissive gesture. "He's a colleague," she confessed, her voice suddenly devoid of emotion, a monotone confession. "Someone I met through some of those events. He's in sales too. We just clicked." She looked away towards the window, then back at him, her eyes cold. "He makes me feel alive, Dave. Something you haven't done in years." Her words cut him deeper than any physical blow. They were meant to wound, and they did, precisely and effectively. The years of quiet partnership, the shared laughter, the raising of their daughter, all dismissed with a single brutal sentence. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold. The fragile peace of their home shattered. An explosive argument erupted, words thrown like weapons, tearing at the fabric of their 20-year marriage. Accusations, justifications, bitter recriminations. They filled the air, echoing off the walls, distorting familiar objects into grotesque shapes. Dave's voice rose, a raw sound he barely recognized. Carol's became sharp, venomous. Suddenly the front door opened, and Sarah walked in with Mark, their soft laughter immediately dying as they heard the shouting. Sarah's face, usually so bright, crumpled instantly. She stood in the entryway, terrified, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, watching her parents tear each other apart. Both Dave and Carol stopped, caught in the act. They tried to compose themselves, to pull back from the precipice, to hide the truth from her. "It's nothing, sweetie," Carol managed, her voice strained. Just a disagreement. But Sarah saw. She saw the raw pain etched on Davy's face, the cold, hard anger in her mother's eyes. She saw the brokenness, the chasm that had opened between them. Her world, which had felt so secure just a week ago, fractured before her eyes. We're all just trying to navigate these treacherous waters, aren't we? Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The following day, with Carol pointedly absent, Dave sat Sarah down. He chose his words carefully, trying to be gentle, but there was no gentle way to deliver such news. He told her about her mother's affair, about the other man, about the lies. Sarah listened, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When he finished, she didn't cry immediately. She just sat there, stunned, processing, her eyes filled with a devastation that tore at Dave's heart. She was torn, clearly, between her parents, struggling to reconcile the mother she knew with the betrayer he described. Mark Johnson, steady and dependable, became a pillar of support for Sarah. He held her close, letting her cry, trying to hold her world together as it crumbled. Dave watched them, a profound loneliness settling over him, deep and pervasive. Even with Sarah's presence, the quiet strength of her pain, he felt utterly alone. His entire life, built brick by brick, seemed to be collapsing into a pile of rubble. The house, once a vibrant, warm home filled with laughter and shared memories, now felt like a hollow shell. Every room seemed to hold ghosts of happier times, whispering reproaches. He looked at Carol when she was there and saw only a stranger. The woman he had loved, the one he had built his life around, was irrevocably gone. In her place was this cold, defiant figure, a painful reminder of shattered trust. The divorce proceedings began swiftly, brutally. Carol, once the quiet homemaker, transformed into an aggressive litigant, her demands unyielding. Bill, true to his word, helped Dave navigate the bewildering legal landscape, introducing him to a no-nonsense attorney, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. But even with professional guidance, the cost, both emotional and financial, was immense. Each legal document that arrived in the mail felt like a physical assault, a formal declaration of war. Carol leveraged her unemployment, the decades she'd spent raising Sarah, as a weapon. Her lawyer, a smooth-talking man who seemed to relish the fight, painted Dave as an insensitive, neglectful husband. She sought a substantial settlement, demanding alimony, a significant portion of his pension, and half the equity in the house. "She means to take you to the cleaners, Dave," Bill had warned, and he was proving tragically right. The house, their home for so long, the repository of their shared history, became another point of bitter contention, each brick a battleground in the escalating legal skirmish. Sarah struggled immensely. The vibrant, engaged young woman Dave knew slowly receded, replaced by a quieter, more withdrawn version. She spent more time at Mark's place, seeking refuge from the heavy atmosphere in their house. The weight of her parents' broken vows pressed down on her, leaving her feeling betrayed, confused. Her engagement to Mark, once a source of pure joy, now seemed strained, the very idea of marriage tainted by the bitter spectacle unfolding before her. She saw love unravel, promises shattered, and it left a mark on her own hopes for the future. Dave witnessed Sarah's pain, the collateral damage of his broken marriage, and a profound guilt settled deep in his chest. She was innocent, yet she suffered the most. He tried to reassure her, to tell her it would be okay, but the words tasted like ash. His own world was in shambles, his voice cracking with the strain of it all. He was a father trying to comfort his daughter, while his own foundation crumbled beneath him. In court, Carol's demeanor was chilling. She sat across the aisle, composed, her expression carefully neutral. Her eyes met Dave's only once, devoid of emotion, a cold, calculated look that solidified his image of her as a complete stranger. The woman he had loved, the one he had shared 2 decades with, was gone, replaced by this cold, determined adversary. He began to resent the years he had given, the unwavering trust he had placed in her. It felt like a lifetime of effort, of shared dreams, had been meticulously dissected and thrown to the wolves. At work, Lisa Jenkins continued to be a quiet source of support. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the way he sometimes stared blankly at his computer screen, lost in thought. She'd bring him an extra coffee or simply sit silently in his office for a moment, a steady, empathetic presence. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Dave," she'd say softly, her concern genuine. He appreciated her unspoken understanding, the small gestures of human kindness in a world that felt increasingly harsh. The legal battles drained Dave of his energy, his spirit. Each paper signed, each meeting with the lawyers, felt like another nail in the coffin of his past, sealing away the memories of a life that was. He walked through his days in a bind, his thoughts consumed by the relentless fight, the arguments, the negotiations, the endless paperwork. It was a war of attrition, and he was losing more than just money. He was losing himself. Dave found himself drawn to the dusty photo albums, relics from a life that felt impossibly distant. He sat on the worn armchair in the living room, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He turned the brittle pages, his fingers tracing the edges of photographs. Here was Carol, a young bride, her face radiant in white lace, her eyes sparkling with a promise. Here she was again, holding a tiny bundled Sarah, her smile soft, full of an undeniable love. Family vacations to Lake Michigan, picnics in the local park, Christmases by the fireplace. Each image was a vivid shard of memory, now sharp enough to cut. The contrast with the current reality was a physical ache, a dull, constant pressure behind his sternum. He remembered the shared dreams they had woven, late at night, whispering about retirement, about watching Sarah grow, about the quiet dignity of their old age. Those unspoken promises, once the bedrock of his existence, were now shattered, pulverized by Carol's betrayal. It wasn't just the infidelity itself that wounded him so deeply. It was the chilling realization that the affair had not merely fractured their present, but had actively erased their shared history, casting a shadow of doubt over every joyful memory. He questioned every past moment. Was that laugh real? Was that touch genuine? Did she look at him then with the same calculating indifference he saw in court? He replayed conversations, gestures of affection, holidays, trying to discern a hidden meaning, a precursor to the deception. The past, once solid and reassuring, now felt like a tapestry unraveling, revealing a tangled mess of lies and half-truths underneath. His work performance suffered. He stared at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring, his mind miles away. Project deadlines slipped. His usually meticulous attention to detail vanished, replaced by a pervasive apathy. Bill, who had been a rock, began to show signs of weariness. "Dave," had said, his voice softer than usual but firm, "you need to get your head in the game. I know it's tough, but you are going to lose everything if you let this consume you." Dave just nodded, unable to offer a convincing response. He isolated himself. Calls from friends went unanswered. Invitations to poker nights or backyard barbecues were politely declined. He found he simply couldn't articulate the depth of his pain, the hollowed-out feeling that gnawed at him. How could he explain that his entire life felt like a meticulously crafted illusion? Sarah tried to reach out, her voice often tentative on the phone. He'd listen, offer a few fractured words of reassurance, but she could sense his distance, the wall he had built around himself. He was a distant, fractured version of the father she knew. The familiar Midwestern landscape, once a source of comfort, now felt bleak and indifferent. The wide-open fields, usually evoking a sense of calm, now seemed to stretch endlessly, mirroring the emptiness inside him. The gray skies of winter offered no solace, only a cold, stark reflection of his inner world. He drove home from work, watching the bare trees, the skeletal branches reaching like grasping hands, feeling no connection to the beauty, only the starkness. The drinking started subtly, a single glass of whiskey at night to dull the edges. Soon it became 2, then 3. He sought numbness, a temporary reprieve from the relentless emotional pain that throbbed beneath the surface. The whiskey offered a brief chemical warmth, a fuzzy haze that softened the sharp edges of his thoughts, even if only for a few hours. The most agonizing realization began to dawn slowly, insidiously. Carol, the woman he had loved, the one he had trusted implicitly, had never truly respected him. Not in the way he thought. Her contempt at the engagement dinner, her chilling laugh, her casual dismissal of their shared history, it all coalesced into a brutal truth. He wasn't just betrayed, he felt diminished, discarded. His value as a man, as a partner, was being questioned, stripped away, piece by painful piece. He was being treated as something easily replaced, easily forgotten. The dreams he had once cherished for his future, for old age with Carol, sitting on a porch somewhere, watching the sunset, those dreams had turned to dust. They no longer existed, replaced by a vast, terrifying emptiness. The future was now a blank, terrifying canvas, devoid of the colors he had painstakingly imagined. Dave's drinking escalated, transforming from a coping mechanism into a suffocating shroud. Days and nights blurred into an indistinct haze, marked only by the amber glow of a whiskey bottle and the increasing emptiness within. He woke with a dull ache behind his eyes, a phantom limb of pain that never fully receded. The steady man he once was dissolved, replaced by a volatile, unpredictable figure. Violent outbursts of anger, sudden and shocking, would erupt, followed by deep, crushing troughs of despair that left him trembling and gasping for air. Lisa Jenkins, bless her persistent heart, expressed serious concern. She'd found him staring blankly at his office wall more than once, his hands shaking. "Dave," she said softly one afternoon, her voice thick with worry, "you're not yourself. You need to talk to someone. A doctor, a therapist, please." He pushed her away, his response sharp, laced with an irritation he couldn't control. "No one understands, Lisa," he snapped, the words echoing hollowly in the small office. "No one could possibly understand this. Just leave it." He was convinced that his suffering was unique, a private hell no outsider could penetrate. Her kindness felt like an accusation, a reminder of his failings. He started writing letters, not emails but actual letters, on yellow legal pads, his handwriting growing more erratic with each passing page. Long, rambling confessions addressed to Sarah, to Bill, even to Carol. He wrote about the confusion, the pain, the betrayal, trying to articulate the labyrinthine chaos that churned in his mind. These letters became his desperate attempt to make sense of it all, to leave behind his version of the truth, a legacy of his shattered heart. He folded them neatly, tucked them into envelopes, but didn't address them. Not yet. He saw Sarah less and less. She had called him, her voice tentative, asking if he was okay. He could only offer platitudes, hollow reassurances. He was convinced she hated him, blamed him for the mess their family had become, for the raw wound of her parents' broken vows. The guilt festered, a poison spreading through his veins. The thought of suicide, once a distant, horrifying concept, a thing that happened to other people, now felt like a gentle whisper, a soft suggestion, a release. It was an escape, a quiet ending to the relentless pain. He pictured it, the quiet stillness, the absence of the churning in his gut. It was a tempting void. One Saturday afternoon in a nondescript pharmacy, he bought a potent bottle of pills. Sleep aids, the label said. He knew their true potential. He slipped them into his jacket pocket, the plastic bottle cool against his hand. At home, he stored them carefully in the back of his liquor cabinet, nestled beside the half-empty whiskey bottle, a silent promise to himself. The world outside his broken marriage seemed to recede, shrinking to the confines of his living room, his office, the dark interior of his truck. News headlines, local gossip, even the weather, all became distant, irrelevant background noise. He was alone in his pain, suspended in a bleak, isolated existence. He tried to envision a future, but saw only a vast, empty expanse. The colors had drained from his mental landscape, leaving behind a stark, colorless void. The weight of his perceived failures, his inability to save his marriage, to hold his family together crushed him. He was losing everything: his home, his savings, his wife, his connection with his daughter. He felt an overwhelming sense of being unwanted, despised, a burden to everyone he knew. There seemed to be no other option, no other way out of the suffocating darkness. The bedroom was quiet, the air still. Dave moved through it with a strange, methodical grace, a final act of order amidst the chaos of his inner world. He tidied the small pile of clothes on the chair, folded the stray blanket at the foot of the bed. He wiped down the top of the dresser with a damp cloth, polishing the wood until it gleamed faintly in the dim afternoon light. It was a ritual, a silent preparation for an ending he had carefully orchestrated. He wanted things neat, undisturbed. He wanted his leaving to be as clean as the room he now stood in. On the bedside table, he carefully laid out the envelopes. 3 of them, addressed in his increasingly shaky hand. To Sarah, to Bill, and the last simply to Carol. He positioned them precisely, one slightly overlapping the next, ensuring they wouldn't be overlooked, wouldn't be ruined by any spilled liquid. These were his last words, his final truths, laid bare. He reached for the whiskey bottle, its familiar weight heavy in his hand. He twisted off the cap, the scent of the dark liquor rising to meet him, a promise of oblivion. He poured a generous amount into a tumbler, the amber liquid glinting. Beside it, he placed the small orange pill bottle, its lid already off. He didn't hesitate. He took the pills, one after another, washing each down with a gulp of the burning whiskey. The taste was sharp, then warm, spreading through him, a familiar comfort and a final act of courage. As the alcohol and medication began to take hold, a slow, dull ache replaced the sharp, insistent pain that had resided in his wrists, in his chest, in his very soul for weeks. The physical discomfort softened, fading to a distant throb. The edges of the room began to blur, the beige walls and dark furniture losing their distinct lines, melting into a soft, hazy expanse. He lowered himself to the damp carpet, the fibers pressing into his jeans, a familiar texture. The carpet, once a symbol of their shared home, of quiet evenings and shared secrets, now simply absorbed the evidence of his despair, a silent witness to his final moments. He closed his eyes. He expected nothing. No tunnels of light, no celestial choirs, no grand revelations. Just the end. The quiet cessation of thought, of feeling, of suffering. The blessed absence. A brief, almost panicked thought flickered through his mind. The letters. Who would find them? How would they be received? Would Sarah ever forgive him? But the thought was ephemeral, quickly dissolving into the growing fog. He dismissed it. He wouldn't be around to worry. He wouldn't be around for anything. His brain, an ancient, primal part of him, struggled, fighting against the inevitable surrender. A desperate, futile fight to hold on to life, to the warmth, to the consciousness that was rapidly receding. A flicker of regret ignited, a sharp, unwelcome spark, a desperate wish to survive, to claw his way back from the edge. He tried to move, to push himself up, to fight against the overwhelming lethargy that had invaded his limbs. But his body was numb, heavy, unresponsive. It felt like he was sinking, slowly, inexorably, into the carpet, into the very floorboards of the house. He felt himself falling, a gentle, silent descent into the spreading blackness. The darkness finally engulfed him, soft and complete. The pain, the suffering, the profound betrayal. All of it ceased. The rust belt whispered its secrets, the wind carrying them across the quiet fields. And another soul paid the ultimate price for broken promises.